Have you ever wondered why your mind races at 3 in the morning when nothing is actually wrong? Why your chest tightens before a meeting that poses no real threat? Why you feel that familiar knot of worry about events that might never happen, outcomes you can't control, dangers that exist only in imagination? You're not alone in this. Right now, at this very moment, millions of humans across the planet are lying awake, feeling anxious about things that objectively probably won't happen. Job interviews that will likely go fine, conversations that will probably be manageable, decisions that aren't actually life or death. And yet the anxiety feels as real, as urgent, as physically present as if a predator were stalking them through tall grass. Here's what makes this so strange. Anxiety is supposed to be protective. It's meant to activate when you're in danger, when threat is imminent, when your survival requires immediate action. That's the textbook definition. That's what every psychology manual will tell you. Anxiety is your body's alarm system designed to keep you safe. But if that's true, why does it fire constantly in one of the safest periods in human history? Why do you feel anxious sitting in your comfortable home, surrounded by walls and locks and the infrastructure of modern security? Why does your nervous system treat an upcoming presentation like a life-threatening emergency? Why does the thought of sending a difficult email trigger the same physiological cascade as facing actual danger? The standard explanation doesn't quite add up. Oh, it's just stress, people say. Modern life is stressful. But that's not an explanation, that's just describing the problem. The real question is deeper, stranger, and ultimately more comforting than you might think. Because here's the thing, your anxiety isn't broken. It's not malfunctioning. It's not evidence that something is wrong with you. Your anxiety is working exactly as designed. It's doing precisely what it evolved to do. The problem isn't the alarm system. The problem is that the alarm system is ancient, and the world it's responding to is brand new. Your anxiety is a message from the past, written in the language of survival, trying to protect you from dangers that mostly don't exist anymore. And tonight, over the next 2 hours, we're going to decode that message. We're going to trace anxiety back through time, following it to its origins in the deep human past, understanding why it evolved, what it's trying to do, and why it keeps firing even when you're objectively safe. We're going to walk through the environments that created anxiety, the pressures that shaped it, the moments when being anxious meant the difference between your ancestors leaving descendants and their genetic line ending without warning. We're going to explore why anxiety became wired so deeply into human consciousness that it persists, even when its original purpose has vanished. And maybe, just maybe, understanding where this feeling comes from will help you make peace with it. Not eliminate it. You can't eliminate something this fundamental, but perhaps you can stop fighting it quite so hard. Stop judging yourself for feeling anxious when logic says there's nothing to fear, because your body knows something your conscious mind has forgotten. Uncertainty was dangerous. For a very, very long time. If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. So maybe subscribe and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always check the comments and it's fascinating. Someone in Auckland at dawn, someone in Chicago at midnight, someone in Amsterdam in the quiet hours before sunrise. All of us, lying in our safe modern beds, feeling anxious about futures that haven't arrived yet, carrying alarm systems calibrated for a world that doesn't exist anymore. So get comfortable, let your breathing slow. You don't need to fight the anxiety. You don't need to force yourself to relax. Just listen. And let's walk together into the deep past, to a time when the anxiety you're feeling tonight made perfect necessary sense. Picture this. It's 80,000 years ago, somewhere in what we now call East Africa, a small band of early humans is facing a problem. Not an immediate crisis, not a predator attack or a sudden disaster. Just a problem. A question that needs answering. The watering hole they've been using for the past 3 months is drying up. The rains haven't come when they should have. The animals that usually congregate there, the ones they hunt, they are moving elsewhere. And now your ancestors, this small group of perhaps 30 people, they need to make a decision. Do they stay here, hoping the rains will come, hoping the water will return? Do they move to a different area they scouted a few weeks ago? A place with water but also signs of a rival group? Do they head toward the distant mountains where there might be water but the terrain is unfamiliar and potentially dangerous? Or do they try something else entirely, some option they haven't even thought of yet? This is uncertainty. Pure, practical, survival-relevant uncertainty. The future is unclear. Multiple options exist. Each choice carries risks, and the decision matters a lot. Choose wrong and the group could find themselves without water in hostile territory. Choose wrong and people could die. And here's where anxiety enters the story. Because as these humans sit around their evening fire, discussing options, arguing about the best path forward, something is happening in their bodies. Something you would recognize immediately if you were there. Their minds are racing, running through scenarios, imagining outcomes. Each person is feeling that familiar tightness, that subtle sense of dread, that awareness that something important hangs in the balance. They're anxious, and that anxiety is doing something crucial. It's keeping them alert to danger. It's preventing complacency. It's ensuring that no one says, let's just pick one and hope for the best. The anxiety is making them careful, thorough, vigilant in their planning. It's activating a state of heightened awareness that increases their chances of making a good decision. This is anxiety working correctly. This is anxiety as it evolved to function. Not responding to immediate threat, but responding to uncertainty about the future. To the gap between now and later. To the awareness that actions taken today will determine outcomes tomorrow, and those outcomes might be dangerous. Your ancestors, who couldn't feel this kind of anxiety, who looked at uncertain futures with calm indifference, who made decisions without that gnawing sense of "but what if?" They often made poor choices. They failed to prepare for contingencies. They overlooked risks. They wandered into situations that could have been avoided with more careful consideration. And they died. More frequently than their anxious counterparts. Natural selection was brutal about this. The humans who could generate anxiety about uncertain futures, who could imagine potential dangers and plan around them, they survived. They passed on genes, behaviors, cognitive patterns that made their descendants, you, prone to the same anxious forecasting. But here's what's crucial to understand. The anxiety wasn't responding to actual present danger, it was responding to potential future danger. To uncertainty itself, to the awareness that the future contains unknowns, and unknowns might harbour threats. This is a fundamentally different kind of fear than what we talked about in our episode on fear itself. Fear responds to present threats, the leopard in the bushes, the cliff edge, the immediate danger that requires immediate action. But anxiety responds to something more abstract. It responds to the unknown future, to possibilities, to the space between now and what comes next. And this capacity, this ability to feel anxious about things that haven't happened yet, it became one of humanity's great cognitive advantages. It enabled planning. It motivated preparation. It kept your ancestors alive during the 200,000 years when survival required constantly thinking ahead, constantly preparing for contingencies, constantly maintaining a state of readiness for problems that might or might not materialize. The groups that survived weren't the fearless ones. They weren't the ones who lived in the moment, unconcerned about tomorrow. They were the anxious ones. The ones who lay awake at night, worrying about the dwindling water supply. The ones who couldn't quite relax because they knew the seasonal migration was coming and they hadn't prepared enough dried meat. The ones who felt that persistent unease about the rival group's movements, that nagging concern about whether their hunting grounds would support them through winter. Anxiety. That feeling you're probably familiar with right now. Lying there in the dark, worrying about tomorrow or next week or next year. That feeling is the echo of every successful survival decision your ancestors made. Every time they felt anxious and responded by preparing more thoroughly, planning more carefully, taking precautions against possible dangers, they increased their odds of survival. And slowly, generation by generation, anxiety became deeply wired into human psychology. But let's be more specific about what anxiety actually does, because it's not just a feeling, it's a coordinated response involving your entire nervous system designed to help you navigate uncertainty. When anxiety activates, your brain shifts into a particular mode. Your attention narrows, focusing on potential threats. Your working memory becomes dedicated to running simulations, imagining scenarios, playing out possibilities. Your prefrontal cortex, the planning center of your brain, goes into overdrive trying to identify optimal strategies for dealing with uncertain futures. Physiologically, your body prepares for sustained vigilance, not the explosive readiness of acute fear. You're not about to run or fight right now, but a more moderate, sustainable state of activation. Heart rate increases slightly. Cortisol levels rise, providing sustained energy. Muscle tension increases, keeping you alert rather than relaxed. Sleep becomes lighter, easier to interrupt, ensuring you won't miss something important. And cognitively, you become a prediction machine. Your mind generates scenario after scenario, trying to anticipate what might happen, how you should respond, what could go wrong, what you need to do to prevent bad outcomes. This is exhausting, it's metabolically expensive, but for your ancestors, it was worth the cost. Because the humans who could generate and evaluate multiple future scenarios, who could worry productively about potential dangers, who could feel anxious enough to prepare thoroughly, they made better decisions. They survived situations that killed the less anxious. They left more descendants. And those descendants carried forward the tendency toward anxiety. Now, think about that watering hole scenario again. Those 30 humans sitting around the fire, anxious about their decision. Let's say they choose to move to new territory. Anxiety continues to serve them. As they travel, anxiety keeps them alert to the possibility of encountering the rival group. It prevents them from becoming careless. It ensures someone always watches the perimeter. It motivates them to move cautiously rather than boldly. When they reach the new territory, anxiety about the unfamiliar environment keeps them vigilant. They don't assume safety, they remain watchful. They test the water before drinking freely from it. They observe the area for several days before committing to it fully. All of this cautious behavior, driven by anxiety about unknowns, increases their survival odds. And when they finally settle in the new area, anxiety continues to function. It makes them stockpile food rather than consuming everything immediately. It motivates them to scout for alternative water sources in case this one fails. It keeps them preparing for the next crisis before it arrives. This is anxiety as adaptive behavior. Anxiety as survival tool. Anxiety as the cognitive mechanism that allowed humans to thrive in an uncertain world where the future was genuinely dangerous and planning ahead was necessary for survival. But here's where the story takes a turn, because that was 80,000 years ago. The world those humans inhabited, the environment that shaped their anxiety, it's gone. The dangers that anxiety evolved to protect against, most of them have vanished. The uncertainty that anxiety helped navigate, it's changed in fundamental ways. And yet the anxiety remains. Because evolution moves slowly, much more slowly than culture or technology or the pace of environmental change. The anxiety response that took hundreds of thousands of years to evolve, it can't unevolve in the mere 10,000 years since humans built the first cities. It can't adjust to modern safety in the 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. It certainly can't recalibrate for the digital age, for global communication, for the particular forms of uncertainty that characterize contemporary life. So you're left with an anxiety system designed for one world, firing constantly in a completely different one. An alarm system calibrated to Pleistocene uncertainty, trying to protect you from 21st century unknowns. And the mismatch between what anxiety is designed to respond to and what it's actually encountering, that mismatch creates the suffering you feel. Let's talk about what uncertainty actually meant for your ancestors in concrete, practical terms. Because understanding the original context might help you understand why your anxiety feels the way it does. For 200,000 years, humans lived in small groups, 20 to 100 people typically. Everyone knew everyone else. Information travelled at the speed of conversation. The geographic area your ancestors moved through, the people they encountered, the challenges they faced, all of it operated at human scale. The uncertainty they dealt with was bounded, comprehensible, navigable. When you didn't know something, you could often find out. Where did the animals go? Send scouts to look. Is that plant safe to eat? Test it carefully. Will it rain? Watch the sky, read the signs, make an educated guess based on experience. The unknowns were real, but they were specific, concrete, and often resolvable through action. More importantly, the uncertainty operated in clear time frames. You needed food today or tomorrow. You needed water within a few days. You needed shelter for tonight. The dangers were immediate enough that anxiety about them led directly to productive action. Feel anxious about food scarcity. Go hunt or gather. Feel anxious about shelter. Build or find one. Feel anxious about that strange sound in the darkness. Stay alert. Keep the fire burning. Watch for threats. There was a tight loop between anxiety and action. Uncertainty triggered anxiety. Anxiety motivated planning and preparation. Planning and preparation resolved the uncertainty or at least mitigated it. Then anxiety could diminish until the next uncertainty arose. This made anxiety manageable, useful. It served its functions and then subsided. It wasn't meant to be a constant state. It was meant to activate in response to specific uncertainties, motivate adaptive responses, and then quiet down when the uncertainty was addressed. But even more importantly, the uncertainties your ancestors faced, they were uncertainties everyone in the group shared. When the watering hole dried up, everyone worried. When food became scarce, everyone felt that same anxious concern. When dangerous weather approached, everyone experienced the same apprehension. Anxiety was collective, shared. You weren't anxious alone, and this collective anxiety served a social function. It coordinated group behavior. When everyone feels anxious about the same uncertainty, everyone is motivated to address it. The group collaborates. They share the cognitive and emotional burden. They work together to resolve the uncertainty. And when they succeed, everyone feels the relief together. The anxious person in the group wasn't seen as weak or dysfunctional. They were seen as vigilant, careful, someone who noticed dangers others might miss, someone whose concern motivated the group to take precautions. Anxiety had social value. It contributed to collective survival. So here's what your ancestors had that you don't. They had specific concrete uncertainties that led to specific concrete actions that resolved or mitigated those uncertainties. They had tight loops between anxiety and resolution. They had shared anxiety that served social functions. They had bounded uncertainty that operated on comprehensible scales. You have none of that, and that's why your anxiety feels so different, so overwhelming, so impossible to resolve. Let's fast forward. Let's trace how anxiety, this useful adaptive response to manageable uncertainty, gradually became the chronic condition that plagues modern humans. The first major shift happened about 10,000 years ago. With the agricultural revolution, humans settled down, started farming, built permanent settlements, and suddenly, uncertainty changed its character. Instead of worrying about today's food, you worried about this season's harvest. Instead of moving when water ran out, you worried about whether the rains would come. Instead of immediate, resolvable uncertainties, you had long-term, uncontrollable ones. You could plant your crops correctly, do everything right, and still lose everything to drought or flood or pests. The tight loop between anxiety and action started to loosen. Anxiety began to extend into longer time frames. Months, years. You worried about things you couldn't immediately address. The harvest was months away, the winter was distant, but you felt anxious now, about events far in the future with outcomes largely beyond your control. This was new. This was anxiety with nowhere to go. You couldn't resolve the uncertainty through immediate action. You just had to wait, prepare as best you could, and endure the anxious state for extended periods. But even then, the uncertainties were still concrete. Specific. You worried about harvest, about water, about storing enough food, and everyone around you worried about the same things. The anxiety remained collective, shared, comprehensible. The next major shift came with civilization. Cities, trade, hierarchies, specialization. Now your survival didn't just depend on your immediate group and the local environment. It depended on complex systems you didn't fully understand, markets, governments, trade networks, social structures. Uncertainty became more abstract. You worried about your status in the hierarchy, about whether you could afford what you needed, about rules and laws and social expectations, about things that couldn't be resolved by direct action, by planning and preparation. You worried about abstractions, systems, forces beyond your personal control. And increasingly your anxieties weren't shared by everyone. Your neighbour had different concerns, different uncertainties, different sources of anxiety. The collective nature of anxiety began to fragment. You started to feel anxious alone, about things others didn't understand or care about. But even civilization, with all its complexity, operated at human scale. You lived in one place, interacted with a limited number of people. The uncertainties were local, even if they were more abstract. You could understand the basic parameters of your world. Then came the modern era, and everything changed completely. Now you live in a globalized, interconnected, rapidly changing world that operates at a scale no human brain evolved to comprehend. Uncertainty isn't bounded anymore. It's infinite. You can worry about anything, anywhere, at any time. Climate change, global economics, pandemics, political instability, technological disruption, and also your job, your relationships, your health, your finances, your children's future, your aging parents, your own mortality. The uncertainties multiply faster than you can address them. There's always something else to worry about, always another future to feel anxious about, always another possibility to consider. The loop between anxiety and resolution doesn't just loosen, it breaks entirely. You can feel anxious about things you will never be able to resolve, things completely outside your control, things that might not even happen. And worse, you face these anxieties largely alone. Your specific concerns, your particular worries, they're unique to your situation. Your neighbour isn't anxious about the same things. Your anxiety isn't shared, isn't collective, doesn't serve a social coordinating function anymore. You're just anxious by yourself about a future that might not arrive, about uncertainties you can't resolve. Your anxiety system, designed for specific, concrete, resolvable uncertainties in small group contexts, is now trying to process infinite, abstract, often unresolvable uncertainties in isolation. It's like trying to use a bicycle to fly to the moon. The tool isn't broken, it's just completely mismatched to the task. And your brain doesn't understand this. Your anxiety system doesn't know it's misfiring. It thinks it's doing its job. It feels uncertainty, and there's so much uncertainty in modern life, and it activates. It tries to protect you by making you worry, by generating scenarios, by keeping you vigilant. But there's no resolution, no way to satisfy the anxiety, no tight loop from concern to action to relief, so the anxiety just persists. It maintains its vigilant state because the uncertainty never resolves. It keeps generating scenarios because the future remains unclear. It exhausts you with constant activation because it can't find a way to shut down. It's working exactly as designed, but in a context it was never designed for. This is why you lie awake at 3 in the morning, mind racing about things you can't control. This is why your chest tightens before situations that pose no real danger. This is why you feel that persistent background anxiety even when nothing is actively wrong. Your anxiety system is trying to protect you from uncertainties using strategies that worked for 200,000 years but don't work anymore. It's not your fault. It's not a personal failing. It's not evidence that you're weak or broken or dysfunctional. It's a mismatch between ancient programming and contemporary reality. It's the inevitable result of evolutionary lag, of living in a world that changed faster than your biology could adapt. And understanding this, really understanding it, that's the first step toward making peace with anxiety, not eliminating it. You can't eliminate something this deeply wired, but perhaps relating to it differently, recognizing it for what it is, an ancient protection system still doing its job, but in a world it wasn't built for. Let's stay with that for a moment. Let's really sit with the idea that your anxiety isn't malfunction. It's precisely calibrated function in the wrong context. Think about a smoke detector. It's designed to sense smoke particles in the air and sound an alarm. That's its job. When there's a fire, this is exactly what you want. The alarm goes off, you evacuate, the smoke detector saved your life. Perfect. But that same smoke detector will also go off when you burn toast, when you light candles, when you take a hot shower and steam fills the bathroom. It's not broken. It's detecting particles in the air and doing what it's designed to do. The problem isn't the detector. The problem is that not all particles in the air represent actual danger. Your anxiety is the same. It's designed to detect uncertainty and sound an alarm. When the uncertainty represented genuine danger, food scarcity, rival groups, dangerous territory, the alarm was appropriate. It motivated adaptive responses. It kept your ancestors alive. But now your anxiety detects uncertainty about your career trajectory, about that text you sent 3 hours ago that hasn't been answered, about whether you said something awkward at the party last week, about climate change, about whether you're living your life correctly, about whether you'll regret your choices, about whether you're enough. These are uncertainties, real ones. But they're not the kind of uncertainties your anxiety system evolved to handle. They're not specific, concrete dangers that can be addressed through immediate planning and preparation. They're abstract, ongoing, often unresolvable states of not knowing that don't respond to the strategies anxiety is trying to activate. So the alarm keeps ringing, not because it's broken, but because it's working, detecting uncertainty after uncertainty after uncertainty, trying to motivate you to resolve them. Not understanding that resolution isn't possible in the way it was for your ancestors, and you, lying there in the dark, feeling anxious about tomorrow or next week or next year, you're not experiencing dysfunction. You're experiencing a perfectly functional system doing what it evolved to do, just in a context where its function no longer serves you the way it once did. This is important to understand, not to excuse the suffering. Anxiety is genuinely difficult, exhausting, sometimes overwhelming, but to reframe it, to stop adding judgment on top of discomfort, to stop thinking what's wrong with me and start thinking this is how human anxiety works in the modern world. Because millions of people right now, this very moment, are lying awake feeling anxious about things that probably won't happen, futures that might never arrive, uncertainties they can't resolve. It's not a personal failing, it's a shared human experience. It's what happens when you take a Pleistocene brain and drop it into the 21st century. Your ancestors who survived, who thrived, who passed their genes forward to you, they were anxious, they worried, they lay awake running through scenarios. They felt that same tight chest, that same racing mind, that same sense of impending something, and that anxiety kept them alive. You inherited that tendency, that sensitivity, that capacity for anticipatory worry. And in their world, it was a gift, an advantage, a survival mechanism that worked brilliantly. In your world, it's more complicated. The anxiety still activates with the same intensity, but the uncertainties it responds to don't require, or respond to, the same kinds of preparation. You can't scout the job market the way your ancestors scouted for water. You can't prepare for social rejection the way they prepared for harsh winters. You can't resolve abstract future uncertainties through immediate concrete action. So the anxiety persists, and you suffer. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're carrying ancient equipment into modern challenges. Because your brilliant, adaptive, survival-enhancing anxiety system is misfiring in an environment it wasn't designed for. As you're lying there now, perhaps you can start to see your anxiety differently. Not as enemy or malfunction, but as inheritance. As evidence of ancestors who cared enough about uncertain futures to worry, to plan, to prepare. Who survived long enough to pass that worry forward to you? The anxiety you feel tonight, it's ancient, it's trying to protect you. It just doesn't understand that the dangers it's warning you about aren't the kind you need to stay awake protecting against. Not tonight, not in this moment. But we're just beginning to understand this story. We've traced where anxiety comes from, why it evolved, what it's designed to do. Now we need to go deeper. We need to understand the specific mechanisms, the exact ways anxiety tries to protect you, and why each of those mechanisms misfires in modern life. So settle in. Let your muscles soften. The anxiety might be there, but you don't have to fight it right now. Just listen. And let's continue walking backward through time, understanding the ancient logic that makes you lie awake, worrying about futures that haven't arrived yet. To understand why anxiety feels the way it does, we need to walk through the specific mechanisms your ancestors developed for dealing with uncertain futures. Because anxiety isn't one thing, it's a collection of coordinated responses, each designed to solve a particular aspect of the uncertainty problem. Let's start with the most obvious mechanism, the one you're probably experiencing right now as you lie there in the dark. The racing thoughts, the endless mental scenarios, the compulsive forecasting of possible futures. Picture yourself 60,000 years ago. You're part of a hunting party tracking a herd of antelope. For 3 days you've been following their trail across the savannah. You know roughly where they're heading, toward a river valley about 2 days ahead. But you don't know exactly when you'll catch up with them. You don't know if they'll stay in the valley or move through it. You don't know if a rival group is also tracking them. This is uncertainty. Significant uncertainty. Your group needs this meat. Weeks of food depend on this hunt succeeding, but the outcome is unclear. Multiple factors beyond your control will determine success or failure. And so, as you walk, as you rest, as you lie under the stars at night, your mind is working. Constantly. Running simulations. If the herd stays in the valley, where's the best place to approach? If they move through, which direction will they likely go? If the rival group is there, how should you respond? Should you hunt tonight and risk a partial success? Or wait until morning for a better position but risk losing them? This mental forecasting, this endless scenario generation, it's anxiety at work. And for your ancestors, it was incredibly useful. The hunters who could imagine multiple possibilities and plan for each one, they were more successful. They anticipated problems before they arose. They had backup plans. They were mentally prepared for various outcomes. This is why your mind races when you're anxious. Why you can't stop thinking about tomorrow's meeting or next week's deadline or that difficult conversation you need to have. Your brain is trying to forecast, to imagine scenarios, to prepare you for multiple possible futures, is doing what it evolved to do, using anxiety as the motivation to think ahead, to plan, to be ready. But here's the problem. For your ancestors, this mental forecasting was bounded. They imagined specific concrete scenarios about immediate challenges. Where will the herd go? What will we do if they move? How will we respond to the rival group? The scenarios were limited by the scope of the situation. Your modern mind doesn't have those boundaries. You can imagine infinite scenarios about infinite topics. You can worry about events years in the future. You can generate increasingly unlikely possibilities, stacking what-ifs upon what-ifs, until you're 3 levels deep in hypotheticals that will probably never happen. Your scenario generation mechanism has no natural stopping point. And worse, most of your scenarios can't actually help you prepare. When your ancestors imagined the herd moving through the valley, that imagination led to concrete planning. Position hunters at multiple points. Have one group ready to respond quickly if they go north, another if they go south. Mental preparation that translated directly into physical preparation. But when you imagine your presentation going badly, when you run through scenarios of awkward silences or challenging questions or technical failures, What concrete preparation does that enable? You've already prepared the material, you've practiced. The endless scenario generation doesn't actually improve your readiness, it just exhausts you. This is the first major mismatch. The mental forecasting mechanism that anxiety uses, it was designed to operate in bounded domains where imagination led to concrete preparation. In modern life, it operates in unbounded domains where imagination often leads nowhere except deeper anxiety. Let's talk about the second mechanism. Physical activation. The bodily experience of anxiety that you probably feel right now. The tight chest, the shallow breathing, the muscle tension, the slight nausea, the racing heart. Go back to that hunting party. You've been tracking the herd for days. You're tired. Your body wants rest. But rest means the herd gets farther ahead. Rest means missing your chance. Rest is risky. Your ancestors needed a mechanism to keep them alert and active despite fatigue, to maintain effort toward uncertain goals that might not pay off for days, to sustain motivation when the outcome was unclear and the temptation to give up was strong. Anxiety provided this. The physical activation that anxiety triggers is not designed for immediate explosive action like fear. It's designed for sustained moderate activation over long periods. Elevated heart rate and blood pressure to support continued physical activity. Cortisol to provide sustained energy. Muscle tension to keep you ready rather than relaxed. Reduced appetite and sleep to maintain focus on the goal. This state is uncomfortable. It's meant to be. The discomfort motivates you to resolve the uncertainty, to keep tracking the herd, to stay vigilant, to maintain effort even when you're tired. The physical sensation of anxiety is a prod, pushing you to address whatever uncertain situation triggered it. For your ancestors, this was adaptive. The physical discomfort lasted days, maybe a week at most, until the hunt succeeded or failed and the uncertainty resolved. The discomfort served a purpose. It kept them going when they wanted to give up, and when the uncertainty resolved, the physical activation could wind down. They'd either eat well or move on to the next challenge. But your modern anxieties don't resolve in days. They persist for weeks, months, sometimes years. You worry about career trajectory, that's not resolving tomorrow. You worry about relationships, ongoing uncertainty. You worry about whether you're living your life correctly, a question that might never have a clear answer. So the physical activation persists, day after day, week after week. Your body maintains a state of sustained activation that was designed to last a few days at most. And this chronic activation has consequences: exhaustion, physical tension leading to pain, sleep disruption, digestive problems, the wear and tear of a system running at elevated levels indefinitely. Your body is trying to motivate you to resolve uncertainty, using discomfort as the motivation. But when the uncertainty can't be resolved through immediate action, the discomfort just becomes chronic suffering. The mechanism designed to be temporary becomes permanent, and you pay the price in fatigue, tension, and deteriorating health. This is the second mismatch. The physical activation mechanism was calibrated for short-term uncertainties that could be resolved through sustained effort. It's firing in response to long-term or unresolvable uncertainties that don't respond to sustained physical activation. Now let's talk about the third mechanism, one that's more subtle, but perhaps even more important to understanding modern anxiety: pattern detection and threat association. Imagine you're that same hunter 60,000 years ago. One day, while tracking game, you notice something. The area ahead is quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no insects, just silence. You feel a spike of anxiety. Not because you've seen a threat, you haven't, but because your brain has detected a pattern. Unusual silence often precedes danger. Maybe a predator nearby, maybe a coming storm, maybe something your conscious mind hasn't identified yet. The anxiety is responding to a pattern, a deviation from normal, a signal that something might be wrong. You become more cautious, more alert. You check the area carefully before proceeding, and maybe you find signs of a predator, or maybe you find nothing and the silence was meaningless. Either way, the anxiety served its purpose. It responded to a potential threat signal before you consciously identified it. This pattern detection, this tendency for anxiety to associate particular cues with potential danger, it was crucial for survival. The humans who felt anxious when encountering unusual patterns, even without clear proof of danger, they survived situations that killed those who waited for proof. And anxiety learned. Your ancestors' anxiety systems became finely tuned to patterns that predicted danger in their environments. This terrain means predators. This weather pattern means storms. This sound means rival group nearby. This feeling means something is wrong even if I can't articulate what. This learning was adaptive because the patterns were reliable. The environment was stable enough that yesterday's danger patterns remained valid today. If unusual silence preceded danger once, it was likely to do so again. Pattern detection and learning created a constantly updated threat detection system. But in modern life, this mechanism creates enormous problems. Because your anxiety system still associates patterns with threats, still learns from experiences, still generalizes from specific instances to broad categories, but the patterns it learns are often misleading or overgeneralized. You give one presentation that goes poorly. Anxiety learns presentations are threatening. Now every presentation triggers anxiety, even though most of them will go fine. You have one awkward social interaction. Anxiety learns social situations are dangerous. Now every social situation triggers preventative anxiety. The pattern detection system that helped your ancestors learn real danger associations is now learning false associations. It's generalizing from rare negative experiences to entire categories of situations. It's treating statistical outliers as if they're reliable predictors. And once anxiety has learned a pattern, it's very hard to unlearn it. Your ancestors needed danger associations to stick. The pattern "this snake is venomous" needed to generalize to "snakes like this are venomous" and stick forever. One lesson, permanent learning. That's adaptive when the patterns are reliable. But when your anxiety associates giving presentations with danger based on one bad experience, that association sticks with the same tenacity. Even after 10 successful presentations, your anxiety system remains convinced that presentations are threatening, because it's designed to err on the side of caution, to maintain threat associations even in the face of contradictory evidence. This is the third mismatch. The pattern detection and learning mechanism was designed for stable environments with reliable danger signals. It's operating in variable environments where single experiences don't reliably predict future outcomes, but it treats them as if they do. Let's talk about the fourth mechanism, one that's particularly relevant as you're lying there trying to sleep. Vigilance maintenance, the inability to fully relax when uncertainty persists. Back to 60,000 years ago, your ancestors have made camp for the night, but they're in unfamiliar territory. They don't know the area well. They don't know what predators might be near. They don't know if the rival group they encountered 3 days ago might be following them. This is uncertainty about safety, and it requires a particular response. Your ancestors couldn't afford to sleep deeply, couldn't afford to let their guard down completely. They needed to maintain some level of vigilance throughout the night, to sleep lightly enough that unusual sounds would wake them, to have someone alert at all times, to be ready to respond if danger materialized. Anxiety managed this. It prevented deep sleep. It kept part of the brain active, monitoring for threats even during rest. It made relaxation conditional, always maintaining some baseline activation in ways danger emerged. This was adaptive for short periods in genuinely uncertain situations. A few nights in unfamiliar territory, then either you'd assess the area as safe and relax, or you'd move on. The vigilance was temporary, proportionate to actual uncertainty about immediate safety. But in modern life, anxiety applies this same vigilance maintenance to abstract uncertainties that have nothing to do with immediate physical safety. You worry about tomorrow's meeting. That's not a threat that could materialize tonight while you sleep. But anxiety doesn't understand this. It detects uncertainty about tomorrow and maintains vigilance as if the threat could arrive at any moment. You can't sleep deeply because anxiety is keeping part of your brain active, monitoring, ready to respond. But there's nothing to respond to. The meeting is hours away. The vigilance serves no purpose except to prevent the rest you need. This is why anxiety and sleep problems are so deeply connected. Why worrying about something keeps you awake even though staying awake doesn't help address the worry. Your vigilance maintenance system is activating in response to future uncertainties, maintaining a state of readiness that was designed for immediate threats. The fourth mismatch: vigilance maintenance was designed for situations where threats could materialize imminently and readiness served a protective function. It's activating in response to future uncertainties where maintaining vigilance through the night serves no protective purpose. Now, the fifth mechanism. This one is more abstract but crucial to understanding why anxiety feels so difficult to control. Uncertainty, intolerance, and the drive for closure. Picture a small group of humans 70,000 years ago facing a decision. They've seen signs of another group nearby, old fire pits, tracks, territorial markers, but they don't know if this group is friendly, hostile, or long gone. This is significant uncertainty, and it's intolerable. Not knowing whether another group is hostile or friendly, that uncertainty creates enormous problems. You can't plan, can't decide whether to approach or avoid, can't determine appropriate level of caution. The not knowing itself is dangerous because it prevents adaptive action. So your ancestors developed a strong drive to resolve uncertainty quickly, to gather information, to make decisions even with incomplete data, to choose a course of action rather than remain paralyzed by not knowing. Anxiety provided motivation for this. The discomfort of uncertainty drove information-seeking, decision-making, closure. When the uncertainty was resolvable through action, send scouts to investigate, make contact cautiously, choose to avoid the area. This drive served well. The anxiety motivated information gathering and decision-making that resolved the uncertainty. But in modern life, many uncertainties are fundamentally unresolvable. You can't know if you'll regret your career choice. Can't know if your relationship will last. Can't know if you're making the right decisions about your children's education. Can't know if you'll be healthy in old age. Can't know if you're living your life correctly. But your anxiety still generates that drive for closure, that intolerance of uncertainty, that desperate need to know, to be sure, to have answers. And when you can't get those answers, when the uncertainty remains despite your efforts, the anxiety intensifies. You might try to force closure by making premature decisions, or by seeking excessive reassurance from others, or by creating artificial certainty through rigid rules and routines, or by ruminating endlessly trying to think your way to certainty that doesn't exist. None of this resolves the actual uncertainty, but the drive is so powerful, the discomfort of not knowing so intense that you keep trying anyway. Keep seeking closure that isn't available. Keep attempting to force certainty about inherently uncertain futures. This is the fifth mismatch. The drive to resolve uncertainty was adaptive when uncertainties were concrete and resolvable through information gathering and decision-making. It creates suffering when applied to abstract, inherently unresolvable uncertainties about distant futures. Let's talk about the sixth mechanism, one that connects directly to social anxiety. Social threat sensitivity and reputation monitoring. Go back 50,000 years, you're living in a group of 40 people. These are the only people in your world. Your survival depends on maintaining good relationships with them, being trusted, being viewed, being included in collective activities. And here's the crucial thing. Reputation in a small group matters immensely and changes slowly. If you're seen as reliable, that perception persists. If you make a mistake that damages your reputation, that damage persists too. Every interaction matters because every interaction contributes to your ongoing reputation. So your ancestors developed heightened sensitivity to social evaluation, anxiety activated in anticipation of social interactions where reputation might be affected. Before important discussions, before demonstrations of skill, before any situation where performance would be observed and judged. This anticipatory social anxiety served a function. It made you careful, made you prepare thoroughly, made you consider how others might perceive your actions. The anxiety-motivated behavior that maintained or enhanced social standing. And your ancestors could read social situations relatively well. With 40 people you knew deeply, you could accurately assess how others perceived you, could tell if relationships were strong or weak, could judge whether your reputation was solid or damaged. The social information your anxiety needed to calibrate its responses was available. But in modern life, you interact with hundreds or thousands of people, most of whom you barely know. You can't accurately assess how they perceive you, can't know what they think, can't judge your reputation because you don't have stable long-term relationships with most people in your life. Yet your anxiety still activates as if every social interaction matters enormously for your ongoing reputation. As if that stranger's fleeting impression will affect your life. As if the barista who sees you spill coffee will remember and judge you. As if social performance in transient interactions carries the same weight it did in small permanent groups. The social threat sensitivity that was calibrated for high-stakes social environments where reputation truly mattered is now firing constantly in low-stakes social environments where individual impressions are meaningless. And you suffer the anxiety of social evaluation in situations that have no real consequences. This is the sixth mismatch. Social threat sensitivity was adaptive in small, stable groups, where reputation accumulated over time and truly affected survival. It creates unnecessary suffering in large, anonymous societies where most social interactions are transient and inconsequential. The seventh mechanism is particularly relevant to the kind of anxiety that might be keeping you awake right now. Negative filtering and threat prioritization. Imagine walking through the savannah 65,000 years ago. Your eyes scan the landscape. You see grass, trees, rocks, sky, clouds, a small bird, a lizard on a rock, and wait, what's that shadow under those bushes? Your attention locks onto it immediately. Everything else fades to background. The shadow might be a predator. You need to identify it right now. This is threat prioritization. Your attention automatically privileges potential threats over neutral or positive information. And this was crucial for survival. Missing the beautiful sunset doesn't kill you. Missing the predator does. So your attention evolved a bias. When in doubt, focus on potential threats. Anxiety amplifies this bias. When you're in a state of heightened anxiety, your attention becomes even more selective, filtering for potential threats, negative outcomes, things that could go wrong. This made sense for your ancestors. When uncertainty was high, when danger was possible, scanning for threats more aggressively increased survival odds. But in modern life, this negative filtering creates serious problems. When you're anxious about something, a presentation, a relationship, a decision, your attention automatically filters for everything that could go wrong. You notice potential problems, remember past failures, imagine negative outcomes, miss or minimize positive information. Your friend says 9 supportive things and 1 mildly critical thing. Your anxious attention locks onto the criticism, replays it, analyzes it, worries about it. The support doesn't register with the same intensity. Your boss gives you generally positive feedback with one area for improvement. Your attention fixates on what you did wrong, barely noticing what you did right. This negative filtering isn't pessimism or personality flaw. It's threat prioritization operating in contexts where most information isn't actually threatening. Your attention system evolved to privilege potential threats because missing threats was dangerous, but it applies this same priority to abstract social or performance situations where negative information isn't actually dangerous, just uncomfortable. And this filtering reinforces anxiety. When you filter for negative information, you find it. When you find it, you feel more anxious. When you feel more anxious, you filter more aggressively. The cycle reinforces itself. creating increasingly negative and distorted views of situations that might be neutral or even positive. This is the seventh mismatch. Negative filtering and threat prioritization was adaptive for identifying genuine threats in environments where threats were real and attention resources were limited. It creates biased, excessively negative perspective. Environments where most filtered information isn't actually threatening. Let's talk about one more mechanism before we move forward. The eighth one, and perhaps the most subtle, the anxiety about anxiety itself, the meta layer that makes everything worse. This one is uniquely human. It requires self-awareness, the ability to think about your own mental states, to be conscious of your consciousness. And while that self-awareness enabled many human achievements, it also created a particular trap. Your ancestors could feel anxious, but they probably couldn't analyze their anxiety, judge themselves for feeling it, worry about whether the anxiety itself was a problem. They felt anxious, responded to it, moved on when it passed. But you, with your sophisticated self-awareness, you can become anxious about being anxious. You notice your anxiety, analyze it, judge it. You think, why am I so anxious about this? Something must be wrong with me. Other people don't feel this way. What if the anxiety itself is the problem? What if I can't handle this? What if the anxiety makes things worse? And now you're anxious about two things: the original uncertainty that triggered anxiety, plus the anxiety itself. You're in a meta loop where anxiety about anxiety amplifies the whole experience. This meta-anxiety creates additional suffering that your ancestors likely never experienced. They felt anxious, acted on it, or endured it, and that was the full extent of it. You feel anxious, then feel anxious about feeling anxious, then perhaps feel anxious about how much you're focusing on anxiety, and so on. The self-awareness that enabled humans to plan, create, innovate, that same self-awareness enables suffering about suffering. It allows you to turn anxiety into an object of anxious attention, creating layers of discomfort that have nothing to do with the original trigger. This is the eighth mismatch. Self-awareness enabled sophisticated planning and metacognition that served human adaptation. But it also enabled meta-anxiety, suffering about suffering, that compounds the experience of anxiety without serving any adaptive purpose. So here you are, lying in the dark, carrying all of these mechanisms. Mental forecasting that won't stop generating scenarios. Physical activation that won't wind down. Pattern detection that overgeneralizes from past experiences. Vigilance maintenance that prevents deep rest. Uncertainty, intolerance, driving futile searches for closure. Social threat sensitivity, activating in meaningless interactions. Negative filtering biasing your attention toward threats that don't exist, and meta-anxiety amplifying the whole experience. 8 mechanisms, 8 different ways your anxiety is trying to protect you, using strategies that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. And all 8 are misfiring, all responding to modern uncertainties in ways that cause suffering without providing protection. This isn't your fault. You're not doing anything wrong. You're just a human, carrying ancient equipment into modern challenges. Your anxiety is working exactly as designed. The problem is the design is ancient and the world is new, but we're not done understanding this yet. Because knowing that anxiety misfires isn't enough. We need to understand exactly how it misfires in your daily life. We need to look at specific modern situations and see how each of these mechanisms activates, how they interact, how they create the complex experience you call anxiety. That's where we're going next. From the ancient mechanisms to modern manifestations, from evolutionary history to your life right now. But first, let your breathing deepen, let your muscles soften slightly. You're learning about anxiety, and learning is effortful, but you don't need to hold tension while you learn. The knowledge will be here when you return to it, and for now you can just listen, just rest, just let the information wash over you. Your anxiety carried your ancestors through 200,000 years of genuine uncertainty. It's ancient, it's powerful, it's still trying to protect you. It just doesn't quite understand that the uncertainties you face tonight don't require the same urgent vigilance. The mechanisms are old, but the night is safe. And understanding why you feel anxious despite safety, that's the first step toward making peace with the feeling. Think about the last time you felt genuinely anxious. Not the constant background hum of worry that's become so familiar, but acute anxiety. The kind that makes your chest tight, your thoughts race, your body tense with that familiar sense of dread. What triggered it? Chances are it was something that poses no actual threat to your survival. A work deadline, a social obligation, a decision you need to make, an email you need to send, a conversation you're dreading, something that objectively, rationally cannot kill you or seriously harm you. And yet your body responded as if it could, as if the deadline were a predator, as if the social obligation were a life-threatening challenge, as if the decision carried consequences as serious as choosing which direction to flee from danger. This is the central paradox of modern anxiety, your threat detection system activating at maximum intensity in response to situations that carry minimal actual threat. Let's walk through exactly how this happens, how each of those 8 mechanisms we discussed translates into the daily experience of anxiety in contemporary life. Let's start with something millions of people experience. You wake up in the morning and within minutes, before you're even fully conscious, you feel it. That weight, that sense that something is wrong or hard or demanding. You haven't checked your email yet, haven't looked at your schedule, but you're already anxious. This is anxiety as background state, and it happens because your brain, while you were sleeping, was still running the mental forecasting mechanism. Still processing uncertainties from yesterday, tomorrow, next week. Still generating scenarios, evaluating threats, maintaining vigilance. For your ancestors, waking with alertness made sense. The night was dangerous. Morning required immediate assessment. Is the area safe? Is everyone still here? What needs attention today? That immediate activation upon waking served a purpose, but you're waking into a world where immediate threats are rare. Yet your brain activates anyway, running through your mental list of uncertainties. The presentation next week, the difficult conversation you've been avoiding, the decision you need to make, the vague sense that you're not doing enough, not being enough, not living correctly. None of these require immediate attention. None of them benefit from you lying in bed feeling anxious. But the mental forecasting mechanism doesn't distinguish between uncertainties that require immediate action and those that don't. It just detects uncertainty and activates, trying to motivate planning and preparation. So you start your day already activated, already anxious, already running the same mental loops you ran yesterday. And this sets the tone for everything that follows. Now you're getting ready for work, and you remember you have that meeting today, the one where you need to present your project update to the team. Instantly, your anxiety shifts focus. The mental forecasting mechanism locks onto this specific uncertainty. Your mind begins generating scenarios. What if they ask a question you can't answer? What if the data doesn't support your conclusions as strongly as you thought? What if your boss thinks you haven't done enough? What if someone challenges your approach? What if you stumble over your words? What if there's an awkward silence? What if they think you're incompetent? Each scenario generates another. Each what if branches into more what ifs. Your mind is doing what it evolved to do, imagining multiple possibilities, trying to prepare you for various outcomes. But instead of helping you prepare, it's just exhausting you. Because here's the thing, you've already prepared. You've done the work, you've reviewed the data, you've practiced your talking points. The endless scenario generation isn't improving your readiness, it's just creating anxiety about scenarios that probably won't happen. This is the mental forecasting mechanism misfiring. It's trying to prepare you for uncertainty through imagination and planning. But the preparation's already complete. The scenarios are increasingly unlikely. And the mechanism can't shut down because the uncertainty, what will actually happen in the meeting, remains until the meeting occurs. Your ancestors might have spent a few hours imagining hunting scenarios before a hunt. Then the hunt would happen, and the uncertainty would resolve. Your anxiety about the meeting might persist for hours, days even, generating hundreds of scenarios, none of which actually help you, all of which exhaust you. As you head to work, you pass people on the street. Strangers. You make brief eye contact with someone and look away, and for just a moment you feel a flicker of anxiety. Did that seem awkward? Did you look too long or not long enough? What did they think? This is the social threat sensitivity mechanism activating. In a small tribal group, every social interaction mattered. How others perceived you accumulated into reputation, which determined your standing in the group. Your ancestors needed to monitor these interactions carefully. But this person you passed, you'll never see them again. Their fleeting impression of you has zero impact on your life. Yet your social threat detection system activated anyway, treating this meaningless interaction as if it mattered, as if it required monitoring and evaluation. And this happens constantly in modern life. Every interaction with strangers, service workers, casual acquaintances, even people you'll never see again, triggers the same social threat sensitivity that evolved for managing reputation in permanent groups. Your anxiety monitors all of it, treats all of it as significant, exhausts itself, tracking social impressions that don't actually matter. Now you're at work, at your desk, and you need to send an email, a relatively straightforward email asking a colleague for some information. But you find yourself hesitating, reading and rereading what you've written, adjusting the tone, wondering if it's too direct or not direct enough, worrying about how it will be received. This is uncertainty intolerance driving perfectionism. The email represents an uncertain future. You don't know how the colleague will respond, and your anxiety is trying to reduce that uncertainty by perfecting the message as if the right words will guarantee a positive response. For your ancestors, careful communication in important discussions made sense. In a small group where every interaction affected ongoing relationships, choosing words carefully served a purpose. But this is an email about a routine work matter to someone you barely know, and spending 15 minutes agonizing over it doesn't actually reduce the uncertainty of their response. Yet your anxiety insists on trying, drives you to seek certainty through perfection. Can't tolerate sending the email while uncertainty remains about how it will be received. So you revise, reconsider, overthink, creating work and stress that serves no actual purpose, and finally, you send the email and immediately check for a response. 5 minutes later, you check again. 10 minutes later, again. This is the same uncertainty intolerance manifesting as compulsive checking. You can't tolerate not knowing if they've replied, what they said, whether it's okay. Your ancestors needed to monitor uncertain situations that could change quickly. But this email response isn't a changing situation requiring monitoring. It will happen when it happens. Checking doesn't make it happen faster, but you can't stop checking because the uncertainty is intolerable. The meeting time arrives. As you walk to the conference room, your physical activation intensifies, heart rate increases, breathing shallows, muscles tense, stomach tightens. This is the physical activation mechanism preparing your body for sustained effortful activity. For your ancestors, this activation before a challenging task made sense. Increased circulation provided sustained energy. Muscle tension provided readiness. The discomfort motivated focus and effort. And after the task, after the hunt or the journey or the difficult work, the activation would wind down. But you're walking to a conference room, not hunting an animal. The physical activation doesn't help your presentation. The racing heart doesn't improve your thinking. The muscle tension doesn't enhance your communication. The activation is inappropriate to the task, yet it fires anyway because your body detects challenge and uncertainty. You give your presentation. And here's where negative filtering becomes obvious. The presentation goes reasonably well. Most people seem engaged. You answer questions adequately. Your boss nods approvingly at several points. One person looks bored, checking their phone occasionally. Another asks a challenging question that you struggle to answer completely. As you return to your desk, your attention fixates on the bored person and the difficult question. Your mind replays those moments, analyzes what you could have said differently, worries about what they thought. The positive signals, the engagement, the nods, the adequate responses barely register. This is threat prioritization creating a distorted perception. Your attention automatically privileged potential threats. The bored person, the hard question, filtered out or minimized neutral and positive information, the general engagement, the successful responses, and now your assessment of the presentation is skewed negative, even though the objective evidence suggests it went fine. Your ancestors needed to focus on threats and problems because missing them was dangerous. But this wasn't a threatening situation. The negative filtering didn't protect you. It just created an unnecessary negative experience and memory of an objectively successful interaction. Later you're trying to work on another project, but you can't focus. Your mind keeps returning to the presentation, replaying the difficult question, imagining what that bored person is thinking about you, worrying about whether your boss was really satisfied despite the nods. This is rumination, driven by a combination of mechanisms. The uncertainty and tolerance can't let go of the ambiguity about how you are really perceived. The pattern detection mechanism is trying to learn from the experience, associating presentations with threat based on the difficult moments. The mental forecasting mechanism is generating scenarios about future consequences. Your ancestors might have spent time after a hunt analysing what worked and what didn't, learning from the experience. But they'd reach conclusions and move on. Your rumination doesn't reach conclusions, it loops endlessly, analysing the same moments from different angles, never arriving at resolution, never settling the uncertainty, just exhausting you with repetitive thought. And underneath all of this, meta-anxiety is building. You notice yourself ruminating and think, why can't I let this go? Why am I so anxious about a presentation that's already over? Something must be wrong with me. Other people don't do this. I need to stop thinking about it. But trying to stop thinking about it just makes you more aware of thinking about it. The meta-anxiety about ruminating becomes another thing to ruminate about. And now you're caught in layers of anxious awareness, suffering about suffering, trapped in a loop that your self-awareness enables but can't escape. Let's shift to a different scenario. Evening now. You're home and supposedly relaxing. You open social media just to unwind. And immediately the anxiety mechanisms activate in new ways. You see a friend's post about a promotion. Instantly, pattern detection and social threat sensitivity combine. Your attention fixates on this evidence of someone else's success. Mental forecasting generates scenarios. What if I'm falling behind? What if I should be further along in my career? What if others think I'm unsuccessful? Your ancestors lived in groups where everyone's status was visible and comparable. Monitoring relative standing made sense because it determined resource access and social support. But this friend isn't in your direct competition. Their promotion doesn't affect your position. Comparing yourself to them serves no adaptive purpose. Yet your anxiety insists on the comparison, insists on interpreting their success as evidence of your inadequacy, insists on running scenarios about what others might think about your relative positions. The social threat sensitivity that evolved for small group competition is activating in response to seeing one person's carefully curated achievement post among thousands of people you barely know. You scroll further. News about climate change, economic uncertainty, political conflict, health crises, crime statistics. Each post is designed to capture attention, often through triggering anxiety and alarm. And your pattern detection mechanism treats all of it as relevant threat information. Your ancestors needed to be aware of environmental threats, resource scarcity, conflict between groups. But they encountered such information rarely, from direct experience or reliable first-hand reports. You encounter a fire hose of threatening information, most of it about situations you can't influence, dangers you can't avoid, problems you can't solve. And your anxiety can't distinguish between local, actionable threats and distant, uncontrollable ones. It activates in response to all of it, tries to generate protective responses to all of it, exhausts itself, trying to manage threats that are either too distant or too large for individual action to matter. The uncertainty intolerance drives compulsive scrolling. Each post might contain information that reduces uncertainty or increases it. You can't stop checking because not knowing what's happening feels intolerable. But checking just exposes you to more uncertainty, more potential hustle, the threats, more triggers for the pattern detection and forecasting mechanisms. Finally, you force yourself to stop scrolling. Time for bed. But sleep doesn't come easily. As you lie there in the dark, vigilance maintenance activates. Your mind won't settle. Keep scanning for unresolved uncertainties. The project due next week, the conversation you've been avoiding, the decision you need to make about that job opportunity, the vague sense that you're forgetting something important. For your ancestors, maintaining some vigilance during rest in uncertain situations made sense. But you're in your home, in your bed, safe. Yet your vigilance maintenance treats uncertainties about next week as if they're immediate threats that require monitoring right now. And the irony is cruel. You need sleep to function well tomorrow, to handle the challenges and uncertainties that are causing anxiety. But the anxiety about those challenges prevents the sleep you need. The vigilance that's meant to protect you is actually impairing your capacity to cope. You might try to force yourself to sleep, but that just activates meta-anxiety. Why can't I sleep? I need to sleep. What if I'm exhausted tomorrow? That will make everything harder. Why am I so anxious? I should be able to relax. The anxiety about not sleeping adds to the activation that prevents sleep. This is modern anxiety in microcosm, an endless cascade of mechanisms activating in response to abstract, distant, or uncontrollable uncertainties. Each mechanism trying to protect you, each one misfiring in ways that create suffering without providing protection, each one interacting with others to amplify the whole experience. Let's look at another common situation. You need to make a decision, a significant one, whether to accept that job offer, whether to move to a new city, whether to end a relationship that isn't working, whether to make a major purchase or investment. The uncertainty is real and significant. For your ancestors, significant decisions required careful consideration, weighing options, imagining outcomes, consulting with trusted group members, making the best choice possible with available information, and once decided, moving forward with commitment, because reversal was often impossible. Your anxiety about such decisions makes sense. It's activating exactly as designed. Mental forecasting to evaluate options, uncertainty and tolerance to motivate information gathering, vigilance maintenance to keep the decision salient until resolved. This is appropriate anxiety, proportionate to actual stakes. But here's where modern life creates new problems. You don't just have access to limited information from direct experience and trusted sources. You have access to unlimited information from unlimited sources, much of it contradictory, some of it misleading, all of it demanding consideration. So your mental forecasting generates not just a few concrete scenarios, but dozens or hundreds. Your uncertainty intolerance drives endless research that produces more questions than answers. Your pattern detection tries to learn from others' experiences but finds conflicting examples. The mechanisms that were designed to process limited information in bounded time are overwhelmed by infinite information with no natural deadline. And worse, modern decisions often aren't final. You could accept the job and quit later, move cities and move back, end the relationship and reconsider, make the purchase and return it. The commitment that allowed your ancestors to move forward after deciding isn't required anymore. So the decision never quite feels settled. The uncertainty never quite resolves. You might make the decision but continue ruminating about whether you chose correctly. Continue imagining alternative scenarios. Continue monitoring for signs that you made the wrong choice. The anxiety persists beyond the decision point because the modern world doesn't require commitment that allows psychological closure. Let's talk about another distinctly modern trigger: Performance in contexts where you're being recorded or observed by unknown numbers of people. A video call where you don't know how many people are watching. A presentation being recorded for later viewing. A social media post that could be seen by hundreds or thousands. For your ancestors, performance situations had clear audiences. You knew exactly who was watching, knew how they'd use the information, knew the consequences of performing well or poorly. The social threat sensitivity could calibrate to actual stakes. But in modern recorded or broadcast situations, you don't know the audience. Don't know who's watching or what they'll think. Don't know the consequences. The social threat sensitivity activates at maximum because it can't assess actual stakes. It treats the unknown audience as maximally threatening because that's the safe assumption. And the performance is permanent. Your ancestors' social mistakes lived in memory, but memory fades and distorts. Your recorded performance exists forever, potentially accessible to infinite audiences. This permanence magnifies the stakes beyond anything evolution prepared you for. One mistake recorded is potentially infinite viewings of that mistake. Your social threat sensitivity has no framework for calibrating to these stakes. Now consider another common modern trigger: abundance of choice. You need to make a purchase decision. A simple thing: which phone to buy, which insurance plan to choose, which streaming service to subscribe to. But there are dozens of options, each with different features, costs, reviews, trade-offs. For your ancestors, significant choices were rare and options were limited. Which direction to move, which alliance to form, which strategy to pursue for a hunt. 3 or 4 options at most, evaluated based on direct experience and trusted advice. The decision-making mechanisms were calibrated for limited options with knowable consequences. But you face abundant choice in trivial domains. 50 phone models, 20 insurance plans, 10 streaming services. The mental forecasting mechanism tries to evaluate them all. The uncertainty intolerance drives compulsive research. The pattern detection tries to learn from countless reviews, many contradictory. And all of this cognitive effort is directed at decisions that ultimately matter very little. The anxiety you feel about which phone to buy is often disproportionate to actual stakes. But your decision-making mechanisms can't distinguish between high-stakes and low-stakes choices. They just detect choice with uncertainty and activate. You experience the same cognitive load choosing a phone that your ancestors experienced choosing whether to ally with a neighbouring group. This is the paradox of abundance. More choices should be liberating, but instead they're often anxiety-inducing because your decision-making mechanisms weren't designed to evaluate abundant options. They work best with scarcity, with clear trade-offs, with limited alternatives. Abundance overwhelms the system, creating anxiety about decisions that objectively don't warrant such intensive processing. Another modern trigger that's particularly relevant right now, as you lie there trying to sleep: the awareness of global catastrophic risks that you have no personal power to influence or prevent. Climate change, pandemic threats, economic collapse, nuclear war, artificial intelligence risks, biotechnology dangers. Your ancestors face threats, certainly. Starvation, predation, conflict, disease. But these threats operated at scales where individual and group action mattered. You could hunt and gather to address hunger, could band together against predators, could negotiate or fight with rivals, could care for the sick. Your actions influenced outcomes, but you can't personally prevent climate change or pandemic disease or economic collapse. These are massive systemic challenges requiring coordinated action by millions of people and powerful institutions. Your individual contribution, while perhaps morally important, is practically negligible in determining outcomes. Yet your anxiety activates in response to these threats. The pattern detection mechanism treats them as salient dangers requiring attention. The mental forecasting generates catastrophic scenarios. The uncertainty intolerance drives compulsive news monitoring. All the mechanisms activate as if you could somehow protect yourself through vigilance and preparation. But you can't. Not really. You can take some individual actions, reduce personal carbon footprint, stay informed about health guidance, maintain financial prudence. But these don't meaningfully reduce the actual risks you're anxious about. They just give your anxiety something to do, some sense of action, while the real risks remain completely outside your control. This is perhaps the cruelest aspect of modern anxiety, the global scale of threats combined with the individual scale of your agency. Your anxiety wants to protect you but can't find actions that actually provide protection. So it just runs, generating scenarios, maintaining vigilance, driving futile information seeking, exhausting you with activation that serves no protective function. And throughout all of this, the work anxiety, the social media comparisons, the decision paralysis, the global threats, you're also carrying routine daily uncertainties that stack on top of everything else. Bills to pay, errands to run, appointments to remember, emails to respond to, tasks to complete, maintenance to perform on your car, your home, your health, your relationships. Each one is minor, but they accumulate. Your mental forecasting tries to track them all. Your vigilance maintenance keeps them active in background awareness. Your uncertainty and tolerance drives you to address them, but there are always more. The pattern detection learns that forgetting things has consequences, so it maintains heightened alertness about everything. Your ancestors had fewer ongoing commitments and better external reminders. The group remembered things collectively. The environment provided cues. The scope of responsibility was bounded by what you could directly influence. But you're expected to maintain awareness of dozens of ongoing commitments with minimal external support, in a world where forgetting can have significant consequences. So you carry a constant low-level anxiety about forgetting something, missing something, dropping some ball in the complex juggling act of modern life. This background hum of vigilance about routine uncertainties adds to all the other anxiety triggers, creating a baseline activation that rarely fully resolves. As you lie there now, perhaps you can see how all of these situations connect, how each one activated the same ancient mechanisms we discussed earlier, how your anxiety is constantly firing throughout your day, responding to trigger after trigger after trigger, using strategies that don't work in modern contexts, exhausting itself and you in the process. This isn't a personal failing. This is what happens when you take mechanisms designed for one world and deploy them in a completely different one. Your anxiety is working overtime, trying its best to protect you, using every strategy evolution gave it. It just doesn't understand that most of the threats it's responding to aren't actually threats, that most of its protective actions don't actually protect, that the uncertainty it's trying to resolve often can't be resolved through the mechanisms it's deploying. You're not broken, you're not weak, you're not defective, you're just living in a world your anxiety system wasn't designed for. And that mismatch, that fundamental incompatibility between ancient mechanism and modern context, that's what creates the suffering. But recognizing this is important. Understanding how and why your anxiety misfires in specific situations, that's the first step toward a different relationship with it. Not eliminating anxiety, that's not possible, and might not even be desirable, but perhaps responding to it differently. Perhaps recognizing when it's providing useful information versus when it's just misfiring in response to modern triggers that don't require ancient responses. And that's where we're going next. Not to fix anxiety or cure it or make it go away, but to explore what becomes possible when you understand it. When you can recognize it activating and say, there's the pattern detection mechanism, overgeneralizing from one bad experience. Or there's the vigilance maintenance, trying to keep me alert about something that doesn't require alertness right now. That kind of recognition doesn't make the anxiety disappear, but it changes your relationship with it, changes how you respond, changes what becomes possible despite the anxiety. But before we move there, let your shoulders drop, let your jaw unclench. You've been learning about anxiety, and learning requires effort, but you can soften the holding while you learn. The information will still be here, the understanding will still grow, and the tension you're carrying is not necessary for learning. It's just anxiety, doing what it does. Your modern life is full of triggers that weren't present in the ancient world where your anxiety evolved. Every day, dozens of situations activate mechanisms that once kept your ancestors alive, but now just create suffering. This isn't your failure. This is the cost of being human in the modern world. This is what happens when evolution moves slowly and culture moves fast. And you're not alone in this. Everyone you know is carrying the same ancient mechanisms into the same modern world. Everyone is experiencing some version of the same mismatches, the same daily cascade of anxiety triggers that once meant something but now just exhaust us. Your anxiety isn't your enemy. It's not trying to make you suffer. It's just ancient and confused and doing its best in a world it doesn't understand. As the night deepens around you now, as you've travelled through the long story of anxiety from ancient origins to modern mismatches, you might be wondering, so what now? If anxiety is ancient, automatic, and constantly misfiring, what's the point of understanding it? What becomes possible through this knowledge? The answer isn't what most people hope for. Understanding anxiety doesn't make it go away, doesn't eliminate the uncomfortable feelings or the racing thoughts or the physical activation. Knowledge isn't a cure. Your anxiety will still activate tomorrow, still respond to the same triggers, still deploy the same mechanisms that have been misfiring in modern contexts. But something does shift, something subtle but important. When you understand anxiety as ancient machinery operating in a new world, when you recognize it activating and understand why, your relationship with it changes. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually. And that changed relationship opens possibilities that didn't exist before. Let's start with the most basic shift that understanding enables. The shift from something is wrong with me to this is how human anxiety works in the modern world. For most of your life, you've probably experienced anxiety as evidence of personal failing. You should be stronger, calmer, less affected by things that don't actually threaten you. Other people seem to handle these situations fine. Why can't you? What's wrong with you that you feel this anxious about things that don't warrant this level of response? This self-judgment creates a layer of suffering on top of the anxiety itself. You're anxious about the presentation, and you're also ashamed of being anxious about it. You're worried about the future, and you're also frustrated with yourself for worrying. The anxiety is uncomfortable, but the judgment about having anxiety is often worse. Understanding the evolutionary origins changes this. Not completely, not all at once, but gradually. When anxiety activates, you can recognize it not as personal deficiency, but as ancient mechanism. Ah, there's my pattern detection overgeneralizing from one bad experience. There's vigilance maintenance trying to keep me alert about something that doesn't require alertness right now. There's social threat sensitivity activating in a meaningless interaction. This recognition doesn't make the anxiety disappear. The mechanisms still fire. The discomfort remains. But the layer of self-judgment can soften. You're not weak for feeling anxious. You're not broken or defective. You're just human, carrying human neurobiology into human life in the modern world. And that's hard, but it's not a personal failing. This shift, from self-judgment to understanding, it creates space. Space to feel anxious without also feeling ashamed. Space to experience the discomfort without adding additional suffering through self-criticism. And that space, small as it might seem, changes the overall experience significantly. Let's talk about another shift that understanding enables. The ability to distinguish between useful anxiety signals and false alarms. Not all anxiety is misfiring. Sometimes your anxiety is actually responding to something worth attending to. You feel anxious about a presentation because you haven't prepared adequately. That's useful information. You feel anxious about a relationship because something genuinely isn't working. That's worth heeding. You feel anxious about a decision because the stakes are real and you need to think carefully. That's appropriate activation. But most of your anxiety, most of the time, is false alarms. Pattern detection overgeneralizing. Social threat sensitivity activating in meaningless interactions. Vigilance maintenance, treating distant uncertainties as immediate threats. mental forecasting generating increasingly unlikely scenarios. Before you understood the mechanisms, all anxiety felt the same. All of it felt urgent, important, demanding immediate attention and response. But now you can start to differentiate. Is this anxiety pointing to something I actually need to address? Or is it just my ancient alarm system misfiring in response to modern triggers? This differentiation doesn't happen automatically or instantly. It takes practice, time, patience. But gradually you can develop sensitivity to the quality of different anxieties. The useful signal feels different from the false alarm once you learn to pay attention to the difference. And when you recognize a false alarm, you have a choice. Not the choice to eliminate the anxiety. You can't just decide not to feel it. But the choice in how you respond. You can recognize, this is my social threat sensitivity activating about that stranger's impression of me, and choose not to ruminate about it, not to let it affect your actions, not to treat it as important information. The anxiety still fires, but your response to it changes. You feel the activation, recognize it as false alarm, and continue with your day rather than getting caught in rumination or avoidance, or excessive reassurance seeking. This is subtle but powerful. Your ancestors couldn't always control their circumstances, but they could sometimes choose their responses. You can't control your anxiety activating, it's automatic. But you can sometimes choose how you respond to it. And that choice over time changes the relationship. There's another shift that understanding enables, one that's particularly relevant to the compulsive behaviors anxiety often drives. When you understand what anxiety is trying to do, resolve uncertainty, gather information, prepare for threats, you can recognize when those efforts are futile. Your anxiety wants closure, wants certainty, wants to know everything will be okay. So it drives you to check and recheck, to seek reassurance, to research endlessly, to analyze from every angle. These behaviors feel necessary, feel like they're addressing the anxiety, but they're not. They're just reinforcing it. Every time you check your email compulsively, you're telling your anxiety that checking is necessary. Every time you seek reassurance from others, you're confirming that reassurance is required. Every time you research a decision to the point of paralysis, you're teaching your brain that certainty is possible if you just gather enough information. But certainty isn't possible. The uncertainty and tolerance that drives these behaviors, it evolved for situations where information gathering and preparation could resolve uncertainty. Most modern uncertainties don't work that way. You can't think your way to certainty about whether you're making the right life choices. Can't gather enough information to guarantee a decision will work out. Can't get enough reassurance to settle the question of whether you're okay. Understanding this allows a different response. When you notice the urge to check, to seek reassurance, to research compulsively, you can recognize this is uncertainty and tolerance driving futile efforts at closure. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes you can choose not to engage with that urge. Not to check, not to seek reassurance, not to research. This is difficult. The urge feels compelling, feels necessary. Your anxiety insists that checking or reassurance or research will help. But when you resist the urge and discover that you survive the discomfort, that the uncertainty doesn't destroy you, you're teaching your anxiety something new. You're demonstrating that you can tolerate uncertainty without engaging in the compulsive behaviors it wants to drive. This learning is gradual. One instance of resisting the urge doesn't retrain your entire anxiety system. But repeated experiences over time can shift the patterns. The anxiety still activates, but its ability to drive compulsive behavior diminishes. The urges remain, but you develop capacity to feel them without acting on them. Let's talk about another possibility that understanding opens, the ability to work with your anxiety rather than against it. You've probably spent a lot of energy fighting your anxiety, trying to make it stop, trying to force yourself to calm down, trying to push away anxious thoughts, trying to prevent anxiety from interfering with your life. This fighting makes sense. Anxiety is uncomfortable and you want it to stop. But fighting actually makes it worse. When you fight anxiety, you're treating it as enemy, as something that shouldn't be there, something wrong, something that needs to be eliminated. And this fighting creates tension, resistance, additional activation. You're anxious, and now you're also striving against the anxiety, which requires energy and attention and creates more distress. But when you understand anxiety as ancient mechanism doing what it evolved to do, fighting makes less sense. Your pattern detection isn't your enemy. It's trying to keep you safe by learning from past experiences. Your vigilance maintenance isn't malicious. It's trying to ensure you don't miss important information. Your mental forecasting isn't punishment. It's attempting to prepare you for uncertain futures. These mechanisms are misfiring, yes. Activating in inappropriate contexts, yes. Creating suffering without providing protection, yes. But they're not malevolent. They're not attacking you. They're just doing their job in a world they don't understand. This reframe allows a different approach. Instead of fighting anxiety, you can acknowledge it. Yes, I feel anxious. That's my ancient alarm system activating. It's trying to protect me even though I'm not actually in danger. This acknowledgement isn't surrender or passive acceptance. It's recognition of what's actually happening. And from acknowledgement comes the possibility of working with the anxiety. I'm feeling anxious about this presentation. That's normal. My social threat sensitivity is activating. I can feel this anxiety and still give the presentation. The anxiety doesn't need to stop for me to do what matters. This is fundamentally different from fighting. You're not trying to make the anxiety stop. You're not waiting until you feel calm to act. You're recognizing the anxiety, understanding why it's there, and choosing actions based on your values rather than your comfort. This is where courage lives, not in the absence of anxiety, but in action despite it. And understanding anxiety makes this courage more accessible. When you recognize this is just my ancient alarm system misfiring, it becomes easier to act despite the discomfort. The anxiety is still there, still uncomfortable, but it's not the enemy you need to defeat before you can live your life. There's another shift that understanding enables, one that's particularly relevant for the meta-anxiety we discussed earlier. When you understand that anxiety about anxiety is a predictable pattern, you can recognize it without getting caught in it. You feel anxious, then you notice yourself feeling anxious and think, I shouldn't be this anxious about something, so may other people handle this fine. Why am I like this? And now you're caught in meta-anxiety, anxiety about the anxiety, layers of distress that compound the original discomfort. But when you understand this pattern, you can interrupt it. There's the meta-anxiety. That's my self-awareness creating suffering about suffering. That's predictable and normal. This recognition doesn't eliminate the meta-anxiety, but it does prevent you from getting lost in it. You can notice the meta layer without believing its narrative, without adding third and fourth layers of anxious self-analysis. This is a crucial skill for living with anxiety, the ability to notice your thoughts and feelings without getting completely absorbed in them. To recognize I'm having the thought that I'm broken, without believing that thought is accurate. To feel the anxiety about anxiety without treating it as evidence that something is truly wrong. Psychologists call this metacognitive awareness or diffusion. The ability to observe your mental processes with some degree of separation. You can't control which thoughts and feelings arise, those are largely automatic. But you can sometimes choose how much you engage with them, how seriously you take them, how much they dictate your actions. Understanding the evolutionary origins of anxiety helps develop the metacognitive awareness. When you know why the anxiety is there, what it's trying to do, why it misfires, you have a framework for observing it without being completely identified with it. This is ancient mechanism, not ultimate truth. This is false alarm, not actual danger. This is misfiring protection, not accurate assessment. But let's talk about something harder now. Something that understanding doesn't fully solve, but does make slightly more bearable. The recognition that some anxiety is simply part of being human in the modern world, and no amount of understanding or skill will eliminate it entirely. This might sound discouraging. You've spent time learning about anxiety, understanding its origins, developing new ways of relating to it. Surely that should lead to less anxiety, to relief, to freedom from this constant companion. But that's not quite how it works. Your anxiety is deeply wired. It's not going away. The modern world will keep triggering it. The mechanisms will keep activating. Some days will be harder than others. You'll still have moments, maybe many moments, where anxiety feels overwhelming despite everything you understand. This is important to accept. Not because acceptance means giving up, but because resistance to this reality creates additional suffering. When you believe anxiety should be gone by now, when you think you should have figured out how to not feel anxious, when you expect that understanding should equal elimination, then every anxious episode feels like failure. But when you accept that anxiety is part of your experience, part of being human with a human brain in a modern world, then the anxious episodes don't carry the same weight. You're not failing when anxiety arises. You're just experiencing what your neurobiology does. And that's hard, but it's not failure. This acceptance is different from resignation. Resignation is passive, defeated, hopeless. Acceptance is active recognition of reality. This is how things are. I don't like it, but fighting reality creates additional suffering. I can accept that anxiety is part of my life while still working to change my relationship with it. From this acceptance comes a certain kind of peace. Not the peace of never feeling anxious, that's not available to you or anyone, but the peace of not constantly fighting against what is, the peace of expecting anxiety in certain situations rather than being surprised and dismayed when it appears, the peace of normalizing rather than pathologizing your experience. And here's something that might surprise you. This acceptance, this making peace with anxiety as a permanent companion, it often paradoxically reduces the intensity of anxiety. Not because you're trying to reduce it, that's still fighting, but because acceptance removes the layer of resistance that amplifies the experience. When you're anxious and also fighting the anxiety, you're activating multiple stress responses simultaneously. The anxiety itself, plus the stress of resisting it, plus the judgment about having it, plus the worry about its consequences. But when you're anxious and accepting of the anxiety, you're just experiencing the anxiety itself. One layer instead of four. Same mechanism, less suffering. This is subtle but significant. Acceptance doesn't eliminate anxiety, but it does reduce the additional distress that fighting creates. And that reduction, while it doesn't feel like victory, does make the experience more bearable. There's one more shift that understanding enables, and it's perhaps the most important. The recognition that you're not alone in this. That anxiety is a shared human experience, not an isolated personal problem. Before you understood the evolutionary origins, your anxiety probably felt unique, felt like evidence that you specifically were broken or weak or defective. Other people seemed to handle things fine. Your anxiety felt like individual failing. But now you understand that everyone is carrying the same ancient mechanisms. Everyone experiences these mismatches between evolutionary programming and modern contexts. Some people might seem less anxious, might appear to handle things more easily, but they're still carrying human brains into human life. They still have pattern detection that overgeneralizes, vigilance maintenance that prevents deep rest, social threat sensitivity that activates in meaningless interactions. The expression varies, the intensity varies, the specific triggers vary, but the underlying mechanisms are universal. Anxiety isn't your personal failing, it's a human condition. It's what happens when you take a Pleistocene brain and drop it into the 21st century. This recognition of shared experience creates connection. When you understand that everyone is struggling with versions of the same challenge, compassion becomes possible. Compassion for yourself. You're not uniquely broken, just human. And compassion for others, they're not having it easier. They're just carrying their ancient equipment differently. And from this compassion comes possibility for different kinds of conversations. Instead of hiding your anxiety, presenting a facade of calm while suffering internally, you can sometimes acknowledge the struggle. This situation is triggering my social threat sensitivity, or my pattern detection is overgeneralizing from one bad experience, or even just, I'm feeling really anxious about this and trying to work with it. These acknowledgements, when shared with understanding people, create connection rather than isolation, create normalizing rather than pathologizing, create space for honesty about the real human experience rather than performance of invulnerability. And this connection itself can reduce anxiety. Your social threat sensitivity evolved for small groups where reputation mattered intensely. When you hide your anxiety, you're confirming that it's something shameful, something that threatens social standing. But when you acknowledge it and find acceptance rather than rejection, you're teaching your social threat system that authenticity is safe. That vulnerability doesn't lead to exclusion. That being human, with all its difficult feelings, is acceptable. Now let's talk about something paradoxical, something that seems to contradict what we've discussed, but is actually deeply important. While anxiety is ancient and will never fully go away, your capacity to work with it can grow enormously. The anxiety remains, but your resilience, your ability to function despite it, can develop and strengthen over time. Think of it like physical fitness. Your body has limitations. You can't suddenly decide to run a marathon if you've never trained. But with consistent practice, with gradual building of capacity, you can develop endurance that seemed impossible when you started. The limitations don't disappear, as you still have a human body with human constraints. But what becomes possible within those constraints expands dramatically. Anxiety resilience works similarly. You can't eliminate your anxiety mechanisms, can't make pattern detection stop overgeneralizing or vigilance maintenance stop activating. But you can build capacity to function despite these mechanisms firing, can develop tolerance for uncertainty that once felt unbearable, can maintain presence in situations that once triggered avoidance, can choose valued actions despite discomfort that once felt prohibitive. This building of capacity happens through repeated experience. Every time you feel anxious and act anyway, you're training. Every time you notice rumination and redirect attention, you're practicing. Every time you resist a compulsive checking urge and tolerate the discomfort, you're building muscle. Not physical muscle, but neural patterns. Connections in your brain that make the same action slightly easier next time. Your ancestors built this same capacity. They felt fear and anxiety constantly. Genuine threats surrounded them daily. But they didn't let fear prevent necessary action. They hunted despite fear of injury. They traveled despite fear of unknown territories. They made difficult decisions despite uncertainty about outcomes. And through repeated experience of feeling fear while acting anyway, they developed capacity to function despite activation. You have access to this same capacity, this same human ability to carry discomfort while moving forward. It's not easy. It requires choosing short-term discomfort for long-term benefit, which goes against what anxiety wants. Anxiety wants you to avoid, to check, to seek reassurance, to wait until you feel calm. But building capacity requires doing the opposite, approaching rather than avoiding, tolerating uncertainty rather than seeking closure, acting despite discomfort rather than waiting for it to pass. And here's what's remarkable. As you build this capacity, as you accumulate experiences of functioning despite anxiety, something shifts in how you relate to the anxiety itself. It becomes less threatening, not less uncomfortable. The activation still feels unpleasant, but less threatening, because you have evidence that you can handle it. That anxiety doesn't prevent you from doing what matters, that the discomfort is temporary and survivable and doesn't need to dictate your choices. This evidence is more powerful than any amount of reasoning or reassurance. Your anxiety system doesn't respond well to logic. You can tell yourself 1,000 times that you're safe, that the anxiety is misfiring, that everything will be okay. But your ancient alarm system doesn't believe words. It believes experience. And when you accumulate experiences of surviving anxiety, of acting despite it, of discovering that the predicted catastrophes don't materialize, your anxiety system slowly, gradually recalibrates. Not to eliminate anxiety, that's not possible, but to trust that you can handle it, to recognize that anxiety activation doesn't equal actual danger, to understand through experience, not just intellectually but viscerally, that you're more capable than your anxiety wants you to believe. Let's talk about specific ways you can work with anxiety, practical approaches that flow from understanding its evolutionary origins. First, you can practice what psychologists call cognitive diffusion. This is the skill of observing your thoughts without being controlled by them. When anxiety generates a thought like, "this will go badly," or "everyone will judge me," or "I can't handle this," you can recognize it as output from your mental forecasting mechanism. Just ancient machinery doing what it does. Not truth, not prophecy, just anxiety-generating scenarios. You might say to yourself, "I'm having the thought that this will go badly," rather than "this will go badly." This small linguistic shift creates separation, creates space between you and the anxiety-generated thought. You're not denying the thought exists, it's clearly there, but you're recognizing it as mental content rather than objective truth. This takes practice. Your anxiety wants you to believe its thoughts, to treat them as accurate predictions requiring urgent response. But with repeated practice of noticing thoughts as thoughts, you can develop capacity to observe without being controlled. The thoughts still arise, that's automatic, but your relationship with them changes. Second, you can practice tolerance of physical discomfort. Much of what drives anxiety-related avoidance isn't the situation itself, but the physical sensations anxiety creates. The tight chest, the racing heart, the shallow breathing, the muscle tension, the nausea. These sensations are unpleasant, and your instinct is to make them stop by avoiding whatever triggered them. But you can practice staying present with these sensations without fleeing. Notice where in your body the anxiety manifests. Notice the quality of the sensations. Notice how they change over time, because they do change, they're not static, even though they feel permanent in the moment. You can breathe with the sensations, allow them space to exist, recognize them as your body's ancient alarm system doing what it does. This isn't about enjoying the sensations or pretending they're pleasant. They're not. But you can learn that you can tolerate them, that they're uncomfortable but not dangerous, that they peak and then subside, that you don't need to flee or fight them. This tolerance, built gradually through repeated experience, reduces the power that physical sensations have to drive your behavior. Third, you can practice mindful uncertainty tolerance. Much of anxiety is driven by intolerance of not knowing. Your mind wants certainty, wants to resolve every uncertainty immediately. But as we've discussed, most modern uncertainties aren't resolvable through the means anxiety deploys. So you can practice sitting with uncertainty. I don't know how this will go, and that's okay. I can't know, and that's the reality. Uncertainty is uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. This isn't resignation or giving up on planning. It's recognition that some things genuinely can't be known in advance. And trying to force certainty just creates additional suffering. You might notice the urge to research compulsively, to seek reassurance, to check repeatedly. And instead of immediately acting on that urge, you can pause, notice it, name it. That's uncertainty intolerance wanting closure. And then choose, is acting on this urge actually helpful, or is it just feeding the anxiety? Sometimes action is helpful. Sometimes you do need more information, but often the urge is just anxiety's futile attempt to eliminate uncertainty that can't be eliminated. And recognizing the difference allows you to sometimes choose differently, to sit with not knowing, to tolerate the discomfort until it naturally subsides, rather than feeding it through compulsive behaviors. Fourth, you can practice values-based action rather than comfort-based action. Your anxiety will constantly push you toward what feels comfortable, avoiding challenging situations, staying in your comfort zone, choosing the path of least activation. And if you follow these urges, your life gradually shrinks, becomes smaller and more constrained as you avoid more and more situations that trigger anxiety. But you have values, things that matter to you beyond just feeling comfortable, relationships you want to maintain, work you want to do, growth you want to achieve, experiences you want to have. And pursuing these values often requires tolerating anxiety. So you can ask yourself, shit, would I do in this situation if anxiety weren't a factor? What action aligns with my values rather than my comfort? And then you can choose that action while making space for the anxiety that accompanies it. Not waiting for the anxiety to pass, but acting despite it. Bringing the anxiety along as an unwelcome but tolerable companion. This is how you live fully while anxious, not by eliminating anxiety first, but by refusing to let it dictate your choices, by recognizing that you can feel anxious and still do what matters. That courage isn't the absence of anxiety, but the willingness to act despite it. And fifth, you can practice self-compassion when anxiety is particularly difficult, because it will be. There will be days when anxiety feels overwhelming despite your understanding, when the mechanisms fire at full intensity, when nothing seems to help, when you feel exhausted and discouraged and frustrated that you still feel this way. In those moments, you can treat yourself the way you'd treat someone you love who is struggling. With kindness rather than criticism, with patience rather than demands that you should be better by now, with recognition that you're doing something difficult, carrying ancient neurobiology through modern life, and that difficulty warrants compassion, not judgment. You might say to yourself, this is really hard right now, I'm struggling, that's okay. I don't need to have it all figured out, I just need to get through this moment, this hour, this day. I can be kind to myself while I struggle. This self-compassion doesn't eliminate the anxiety, but it reduces the additional suffering that self-criticism creates. And that reduction matters. So here's where all of this leaves you. Lying in your bed, in your safe modern room, still feeling some version of anxiety. Nothing has fundamentally changed about your neurobiology. The mechanisms are still there. The mismatch between ancient programming and modern context persists. But something has shifted. You understand now. Understand where the anxiety comes from, why it activates, what it's trying to do, why it misfires, how it creates suffering while trying to provide protection. And that understanding, while it doesn't eliminate anxiety, changes what's possible in relationship with it, changes how you interpret it, changes how you respond to it, changes what you choose to do despite it, changes how you talk about it with yourself and others, changes what becomes possible in your life even while anxiety remains. Your anxiety is ancient, it's powerful, it's persistent. It carried your ancestors through 200,000 years of genuine uncertainty and danger. And it's still here, still trying to protect you, still doing what it evolved to do. It's just confused about what protection means in a world that's changed beyond recognition in the blink of evolutionary time. This isn't your failure. This isn't evidence that something is wrong with you. This is just what it means to be human. To carry ancient equipment into modern challenges. To feel ancient fears about modern uncertainties. To experience mismatches that create suffering you didn't choose and can't completely prevent. But you can live with this. Millions of people do every day. They feel anxiety, often intense, sometimes overwhelming anxiety, and they still live meaningful lives. Still do things that matter to them, still create, connect, contribute, love, grow. Not because they've eliminated anxiety, but because they've learnt to do things despite anxiety. To make space for it without letting it dictate everything. You can develop this capacity too. Not perfectly, not all at once, not without difficulty, but gradually. Through repeated experiences of feeling anxious and acting anyway. Through practicing recognition of mechanisms rather than absorption in them. Through choosing responses based on values rather than comfort. Through accepting anxiety as part of your experience rather than fighting against its existence. This is the work of being human in the modern world. Learning to carry ancient biology through contemporary life. Learning to work with mechanisms that were designed for a different world, Learning to live fully despite discomfort that will probably never fully disappear. As you're lying there now, perhaps you can make peace with the anxiety that might be present, not by making it go away, that's not available, but by recognizing it for what it is. Ancient alarm, trying to protect you. Confused about what protection means, doing its best in a world it doesn't understand. Your anxiety isn't your enemy. It's not attacking you, it's not evidence of your inadequacy, it's just old. Remarkably, beautifully, frustratingly old. And it's yours to carry, to understand, to work with, to live alongside. The uncertainties that trigger your anxiety, they're not going away either. Modern life will keep providing them. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, next week will offer new unknowns, next year will present new decisions and possibilities and risks, and your anxiety will keep activating in response. That's what it does. That's what it's designed to do. The mismatch will persist. The suffering will return. This isn't a story with a neat resolution where you learn the lessons and the problem disappears. But you'll be different. You'll understand, and that understanding, imperfect and incomplete as it might be, creates possibility that didn't exist before. Possibility for different relationship with anxiety. Possibility for action despite discomfort. Possibility for compassion toward yourself and others who share this challenge. Possibility for living fully while anxious rather than waiting for anxiety to end before life can begin. Your ancestors survived their fears, carried their anxieties, lived despite the constant uncertainty and genuine danger that surrounded them. They passed that anxiety forward to you, along with their resilience, their capacity to endure, their ability to keep going despite discomfort. You carry their anxiety, but you also carry their strength, their persistence, their refusal to let fear and worry prevent living. That's your inheritance too, not just the anxiety, but the capacity to live with it, to work with it, to build meaningful lives despite it. And tonight, right now in this moment, you can rest. The anxieties about tomorrow, they'll be there tomorrow. They don't need your attention right now. Your vigilance maintenance might insist otherwise, but it's wrong. The uncertainties aren't going anywhere. You don't need to solve them tonight. The mechanisms will keep running. That's what they do, but you can let them run in the background while you rest, can feel the activation without feeding it with attention, can notice the thoughts without engaging with them, can allow your body to soften despite what your anxiety insists is necessary. This is hard. Resting while anxious feels counterintuitive, like giving up on protection, like leaving yourself vulnerable. But you're not vulnerable. You're safe, and rest will serve you better than vigilance tonight. The problems you're anxious about, they'll be more manageable after sleep than after a sleepless night of worry. So let your breathing deepen, let your muscles soften, let the thoughts continue if they must, but in the background while you drift. You don't need to control the anxiety, don't need to make it stop, don't need to fight it or fix it or figure it out tonight. Just let it be, ancient alarm, doing what it does, while you rest despite it. Your anxiety kept your ancestors alive. Now it's your turn to live despite it, to rest despite it, to build a life that includes it without being defined by it, to carry this ancient inheritance with understanding, with compassion, with acceptance of what is, rather than constant striving for what should be. The night is deep now. The ancient alarms are still running, still watching, still trying to protect. But the threats they're watching for, they're not here. Not tonight. Not in this moment. You're safe. Your ancestors bought this safety with 200,000 years of vigilance. Tonight, that vigilance can rest. And so can you. Let your jaw unclench. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath slow to its natural rhythm. The anxiety might whisper that you need to stay alert, but you can acknowledge that whisper without obeying it. Your body knows how to rest. It's done this before, will do it again, can do it now. The racing thoughts, they're just mental forecasting, trying to prepare you for tomorrow. They mean well, but tomorrow isn't here yet. And when it arrives, you'll meet it as you've met every other tomorrow, one moment at a time, doing your best with what you have. Tonight, you have rest available. You have darkness and quiet and safety and the possibility of sleep. That's enough. That's always been enough. Your anxiety wants you to believe you need more. More certainty, more control, more preparation. But you don't. Not tonight. Sleep well, dream peacefully, and know that your anxiety, difficult as it is, connects you to everyone who came before and everyone alive now. We're all carrying ancient equipment through modern life. We're all working with mechanisms that don't quite fit the world we inhabit. We're all doing our best with an inheritance we didn't choose. You're not alone in this. You're not broken for feeling it. You're just human, beautifully and frustratingly human, carrying the full complexity of what that means. The anxiety will be there tomorrow. But so will you, wiser now, more understanding, better equipped not to eliminate the discomfort, but to live alongside it, to work with it rather than against it, to recognize it without being controlled by it. That's enough. For tonight, that's more than enough. Your ancestors survived their long nights of uncertainty by staying alert, by maintaining vigilance, by letting anxiety keep them safe. They gave you that gift, the capacity for anxiety that protected them through genuine dangers. But they also gave you something else, the capacity to endure despite fear, the strength to continue despite worry, the resilience to build lives worth living even when uncertainty never fully resolves. You carry both gifts, the anxiety and the resilience, the alarm and the courage, the ancient fear and the very human refusal to let that fear define everything. Tonight, let the alarm rest. Let the mechanisms quiet. Let the ancient inheritance do what it needs to do while you sleep. You've carried it all day. You'll carry it tomorrow. But right now, right here, you can set it down, just for tonight. Just for now. Everything else can wait until morning, and your ancestors would be proud. Good night.